If your garden is bursted with jalapeno peppers, you've come to the right spot. Today I'm going to show you how to ferment jalapenos the easy way. Just simple steps to produce a delicious result that you can use in snacks, salsas, and more. So let's roll. Step one is you want to slice your jalapenos, you want to prep your garlic, and you want to slice your onions. This is the perfect ratio of flavors that I have come up with that is just perfect every single time. With fermentation, we make a brine. That brine is a ratio of 4 tablespoons of salt to every 2 cups of water. Why do we have that brine ratio? It's because we always want to stay in between the 2 to 3% salt by weight ratio when we're doing fermentation. It's to keep things safe, because we don't want too much salt, or else it'll slow down the bacteria growth, the good bacteria growth. We don't want too little, because then it will increase the bad bacteria growth. So 4 tablespoons per 2 cups of water is the perfect way to go. It keeps things as simple as possible, and you get the same consistent result every single ferment that you make. Okay, so I'm gonna make my brine. So I have a half-gallon jar of water. I have 6 cups of water, so now I put 12 teaspoons of salt in here. Now my salt I use Redmond's real salt. It has the minerals, so my water may look a little bit different than yours, and that's okay. The only thing that you don't want to use is iodized table salt. You don't want to use that. You want to use a canning salt or a real sea salt. I'm gonna put a lid on it. I'm gonna shake it up a little bit, and then it's gonna sit there while I pack my jars. Now I'm just gonna layer these ingredients in. So first, I'm gonna throw in a handful of jalapenos into each jar. Maybe a handful and a half. I'm going to grab a handful of onions. Now to keep things simple, I used my food processor to process the onions. It comes out these little strips, which is perfect for the end result. I'm gonna dump it in my jar, maybe another handful. Onions just are gonna make everything more flavorful. I'm gonna grab a couple cloves of garlic and I'm just gonna toss that in, and then I'm gonna top it off with more jalapenos. And now I'm just gonna fill the rest of my jars. A quick note to mention is that you don't wanna pack your jars all the way to the top, because we're gonna have to put a weight or something in there to keep all of the food mass down. So we wanna leave probably a good 2 inches worth of headspace in the jar, so that way we have enough to fill up the brine as well as put a weight inside. Now when it comes to fermenting, you don't need fancy tools, but if you happen to have fancy tools, the process of fermenting goes just a little bit faster. So I have a tamper, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tamp down all of the jars so that everything is pushed down, so that way we have enough room for the weight. If you don't have a tamper, you can just use a wooden spoon, your fist, anything to just push the mass down. See, by tamping it down, I made some more space so that I can add a little bit of more jalapenos or onions to. A couple of fermenting tools that you can get if you would like, but if not necessary. So over the years, I've accumulated these weights. They're glass weights, get them on Amazon, quite expensive. But sometimes it's just worth it, the investment, in order to make food preservation a little smoother. You can also get these ball lids with the little gasket right here. It lets gas out but not air in. And then there's also these little lids that you can put on top, and then you use a canning ring to go over, and then it holds everything in place. Again, there's a little air hole on the top. It lets gas out but doesn't let air in. All that being said, if you do not have any tools, that is okay. We're keeping it simple. Just grab yourself a little sandwich bag, fill it with filtered water, and I want to stress, fill it with filtered water, not tap water, because in case there's a tiny little pinhole inside of your bag and it starts to leak into your jar, at least it's filtered water and not tap water filled with whatever it is that we filled our tap water with. And instead of one of the fancy lids with the little air hole being able to expel gas and all of that jazz, you can simply use a paper towel with a canning ring to go over your jar. Again, it'll release the gas, won't let anything in, and it'll keep things safe as well. So tons of options. We don't need to go out and buy stuff. We can just simply do this in our home with what we have. Okay, so now we have our water that's been sitting there. I'm gonna shake it up again. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna fill the jar. Again, we're gonna leave some room, so go right below the last ring on your canning jar. Do you need to use canning jars? No, just whatever vessel you have. I do highly recommend glass though, do not use plastic. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and fill it. have all these little air bubbles going. Water's gonna go, fill in the space in between everything. Okay, and then I'm just gonna top it off. Now, this is the part where we can put our weight. So the weight's gonna go right on top. It's gonna push up the water. So make sure you're doing it over a sink. And it's gonna push down all of the mass inside of your jar. And this is going to keep it safe because with fermentation, we want an anaerobic environment, which means lack of oxygen in order for all of the delicious, good bacteria to start to develop. If we have pieces of food outside and exposed to oxygen, that's when mold starts to happen and bad bacteria can start to create. So don't get freaked out. With fermentation, I know this is gonna be a rough one to hear, but you will get some scum on top of your jars. You might get a little bit of mold. All you do is just wipe that off or remove that piece of food that has mold on it and just remove it, discard, make sure everything else is pushed down and everything looks good. So small bit of mold on top does not mean your whole fermentation is ruined. Just have the confidence and trust that the process is the process, okay? Again, we're keeping it simple. Okay, so with the glass weight, I'm gonna put the weight, all my food is pushed down. I can see the water at the top of my jar. I'm gonna stick one of these lids on top of my jar with the canning ring. And bada bing, that's done. Okay, let's show you a different version with using the baggie full of water. So again, I'm gonna fill up my jar with my brine. I'm gonna stop at this bottom lip. I'm gonna take my baggie, I'm gonna put it right on top. Again, do it over a sink because all the water is going to be pushed out. Try to get as much of the air out of your bag as possible so that way it's easier to stick inside your jar and put a lid on it. If I have any seeds or anything on the rim of my jar, I just remove it. I put on one of these and put on my ring. Okay, now I'm going to show you one with the paper towel. Now with this one, you're still going to need a weight. So I'm gonna use my glass weight, but you can use your baggie full of water. Just make sure everything is kind of pushed down. If you're gonna use a baggie full of water and the paper towel, you're gonna wanna leave a little bit more room. So you're probably gonna wanna end your food right there so that way you have a little bit more room so that way when that baggie sits inside your jar, it's not pushing all that water up and then wetting your paper towel. So there's my weight. I'm gonna grab my paper towel. I'm gonna put it over. Grab my canning ring, and I'm just going to screw it on. And there it is. So that's going to be perfectly fine to ferment your jalapenos if you don't have any equipment for fermentation. No, you do not need to remove your seeds before fermenting. However, I do want to stress that if you start to cut into your jalapenos and they've been storing for a little too long, the seeds will be black on the inside. I just choose not to use those. You don't want to ferment or can anything that has any blemishes or is starting to go on their way out. So if I do have a handful of jalapenos that have the black seeds on the inside because I just stored them in the fridge for too long, I just go ahead and give those to the chickens. Other than that, you do not need to remove the seeds. Salt ratio is one that trips everybody up. So as long as you stick to the 4 tablespoons per 2 cups of water ratio, you are in the golden spot. And again, consistency is key because once you get a good jar of jalapenos or a good jar of any ferment, you want to be able to replicate that each and every time. Instead of doing a whole bunch of different recipes, a whole bunch of different ratios, and not ever knowing which one was good, because chances are a few months down the road when you open up that jar and you're like, oh gosh, this is disgusting, you don't know which recipe did not repeat again. So the 4 teaspoons of salt per 2 cups of water is golden. You know your jars are fermenting correctly when you go in and you see little bubbles going up to the top. You do not see any mold. Now again, caveat on mold is that you might see some on the top layer. That's okay. Again, mold is sometimes part of the fermentation world. So you just really got to get comfortable with that. It's okay to just remove that top layer. Sometimes I'll just kind of scrape off the whole top layer, even though, you know, if I see some scum, just to kind of keep things as, you know, safe as possible, I'll just kind of scrape off that first layer of the food and it's good to go. You want to ferment your jars of jalapenos between 6 to 7 days. The length of time each ferment takes is always different. It depends on the temperature in your home. It depends on the season. It depends on the amount of bacteria on top of the food. There's no one amount or one length of time that your ferment is going to take and it's going to be perfect every time. You're just going to have to watch it. And this is where you start to build those skills and that confidence to know when your ferment is done. And tasting your ferment is always the best way to tell. If it's still too salty, let it go a couple more days. If it's the right amount of saltiness and sour, you're good to go. And as you continue to do these fermentations, you'll start to know what your taste buds and your family like to enjoy. So I always check my ferments about 5 days in to see what that flavor profile is starting to do. And if it needs to go longer, it'll go longer. You can tell your ferment has gone bad if it smells completely off. Now, your ferments are always going to smell a little sour. Now, if it smells very moldy or sometimes yeasty, depending on what you're fermenting, you don't want that smell. Chances are you're good, but there might be a small chance that it was just a bad batch. Or maybe you put in some food that was just slightly going out already and it just turned bad in the whole process. I gotta say, I may have only thrown away 1 jar of food this season, but it's very rare that I do. So again, trust the process. In the world of fermenting, you got new smells, you got new visual cues, and you got new tastes. So you're gonna have to just learn and trust your gut. All ferments need to go into cold storage, so a fridge, or if you have a really cool root cellar that maintains a specific temperature, typically be below 40 degrees is that sweet spot. It needs to go in cold storage, and it'll last anywhere between 6 months to a year. Again, you're just gonna have to open up your jars, take a look at what's going on. If you have a little bit of mold, again, scrape it off. But chances are it'll last a pretty long time inside your fridge. Fermenting jalapenos is supposed to be simple, so keep it simple. If you have any more questions, feel free to drop it in the comments below. We also have a blog post that goes along with this video that gets a little bit more detailed, a little bit more in depth. We like to keep our videos short and simple because if you're anything like us, if you don't get to the meat and potatoes right off the bat, we're out. So our videos are short and simple. Our blog posts are a little bit more in depth to answer more questions with a little bit more reasons why, history, how things work. So in the blog post, we get into lactic acid and what that is and why it's good and all of that fun stuff. When you do make your jar of jalapenos, leave a comment and let me know how you like it. This brine can go with any vegetable ferment. This is the same brine that I use to ferment carrots. Again, it's the same thing. It's carrots, onions, and garlic. With certain things like that, there's a longer ferment time, but other than that, this brine can go and ferment almost anything. So have fun with it, enjoy. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If not, we'll see you next time. Today I'm going to show you how to ferment jalapeno peppers so you can use them as snacks, in salsas, or between the 2 to 3% by salt weight